Volunteer with the Book Festival. It's my honor and privilege to introduce the authors this evening. We're going to get started with Marina Richie. Marina is a nature and environmental writer based in Bend, Oregon, formerly of Missoula, Montana, the focal point of her 2022 book, Halcyon Journey, In Search of the Belted Kingfisher. She's the author of the children's books, Bird Feats of Montana and Bug Feats of Montana. Everyone, please welcome Marina Richie.
I'll try not to stand in front of the screen. That's coming up right after me. So good to be back in Missoula. Microphone, thank you. I will stand over here.
Do you want me to move that in front of the podium?
I can just, I better not touch that. I don't want to mess this up. Okay. I think it's going to work. Okay, how's that? No? Okay, how's that? Working? Okay, got it. Thank you. All right. So happy to be here. Several of you are in this book. Others don't know what it's about at all. So I'm going to kind of cover it all. But Halcyon Journey in Search of the Belted Kingfisher is a book that spans 7 seasons, but many more years on Rattlesnake Creek, Missoula, Montana, right here, chasing kingfishers. And I'm going to, the book covers quite a few other places as well, goes all the way to South Africa, but comes back here again. And because we're here, I'm going to focus my reading on parts that are right in Missoula. And many people ask me, why is this book called Halcyon Journey? And I'm just going to quickly read why, the very first definition that caught my interest. I thought I'd known what halcyon meant. Halcyon, noun, 1, a kingfisher. A myth, 2, a mythical bird identified with the kingfisher that was fabled to nest at sea about the time of the winter solstice and to calm the waves during incubation. 3, calm, quiet, peaceful, undisturbed, happy as deep halcyon repose. 4, marked by peace and prosperity as halcyon years. So that was a pretty attractive reason to follow the kingfisher all by itself. But for those of you who also aren't familiar with the bird, there's just a quick little part in the very beginning. Flying with practiced ease above North America's streams, rivers, lakes, ponds, and coastlines, belted kingfishers are the supreme avian anglers. They may be only a tad bigger than robins, but their beaks are blades and their obsidian eyes miss nothing. Whether hovering or diving from a branch, a kingfisher's head-first plunge to snap fish near the surface is swift and precise. Touching down by cities, farms, and wilderness alike, belted kingfishers flourish only where water is clean, in places with plentiful fish, perches, and coveted earthen nest banks. Even their plumage matches the sheens of water and stone. Dusky blues, grays, whites, and for the female, a dash of cinnamon red to form the namesake belt. I'm going to read a part in the first chapter, which is called Hole Quest, H-O-L-E, because kingfishers nest in holes, which is a very unusual thing that you'd learn a lot more about in this book. On the alert for kingfishers on Rattlesnake Creek, my running shoes squelched on a muddy and leafy trail through Greeno Park, a half-mile downstream from home. Just as a song sparrow and dipper sang their a cappella of spring, I stopped in mid-step. The chattering call of a kingfisher is like and unlike a scolding pine squirrel. The tune harmonizes with the higher-pitched melody of a rocky rivulet. If I could learn to roll my R's, the vibration of air across the tip of the tongue would come close to mimicking the fastest, lightest trills. When giving commentary on the stream below, the calls are softer twitterings, but when alarmed, a high volume, which is really a lot louder, commands attention. Even the name Rattlesnake Creek sounds kingfisherly. Some say the name stems not from the snake, but from the sound of tumbling waters over stone. I say the rattle honors a fine avian angler on a sinuous creek. A male jetted after another male, blitzing the currents. Racing after the duo, I tore through a labyrinth of black cottonwoods, alders, and ponderosa pines, cut a bend, and scrambled down a willow-rooted bank to intercept the race. Nothing. Running upstream and then bushwhacking to the creekside, I saw them carom by, gone in 2 seconds. With a quarry to hunt, my senses sharpened, scribbled observations began to fill pocket notebooks. So I'm following the kingfisher, really looking for a nest. And at the time, I also, throughout this book, I weave in some memoir and some reflections, and they often have to do with my father, who was quite a birder. So I wanted to read a little part from that. This is where I had been reading the scientists and conferring with researchers on just how I could study these birds, which turned out to be very wary, territorial, difficult to follow. They certainly aren't in flocks, kingfishers. That evening, I reviewed what Mick Hummus had written in 1975. A pair tended to select their nest during courtship as the male began to slash and probe the bank with his bill, and the female remained the watcher. Already, there seemed to be something different in Montana. And this part, I had actually named the kingfisher pair that I'd found to watch, Halcyon and Ceyx, and that's after the Greek myth. So that's why you'll hear this name. Halcyon appeared, an enthusiastic participant in the courtship ritual. She caressed the bank with spread wings as if to suggest, try this spot. Training a spotting scope on a choice hole across the creek below the dam next morning, I wondered, which hole? If any. I'd sketched the bank and mapped out 6 holes, with a particular round one standing out as a prime candidate a couple of feet down from the top and 8 feet above the ground. My fingers ached with the chill of dawn. A pair may dig multiple burrows in a single bank and then occupy one. That would make sense if the birds struck roots or rocks deep within the soil. A bounty of holes can reflect the industry of many seasons of digging. I wondered, might numerous entries baffle a predator? A marsh male may construct a dozen or more softball-sized woven and domed nests in the reeds. The array of nests might flummox predators or help him woo a mate, since females inspect the workmanship. Nests also serve as backups if one fails and as an extra shelters for both fledglings and adults in winter. Sounds smart to me. I was still learning a lot in the beginning. Song sparrow melody blossomed from dogwoods like a prelude in the still slumbering wildflowers. Cold seeped in, 4 white-tailed deer faded into the Douglas firs above the pockmarked steep bank. A light-phased red-tailed hawk crossed a cerulean sky. 6 tree swallows wheeled in. A mourning dove angled past, plump-bodied and tinted in dawn colors. The sound of the creek was a steady wind on a windless day of waiting. A month before my father died of colon cancer in 2002, at the age of 70, I'd sent him a decorated cigar box filled with ribbon-tied paper scrolls. On each one, I'd penned a few lines, inspired by the nature he had taught me to notice. I wrote as if the words might keep him breathing. By the time the scrolls arrived, he was too weary for reading. Instead, I spoke the haikus over the phone, of new leaves unfurling to the susurrations of warblers, of spicy pungency of firs and clouds and sun and a flamenco of the moment. Hey, Dad, I whispered from the stream bank watch, I'm freezing. I know, we're tough, aren't we? Remember that long Boston race by the Charles River in the icy rain when I couldn't feel my legs? We kept going. We didn't give in. Throughout my high school years, we often ran 10 or 15-mile-long runs in Concord and competed in road races on weekends. My father took it to the next level, running the Boston Marathon in under 3.5 hours twice. So he was often with me in this journey. And I'm going to skip ahead, just giving little samples through the book. And it's not really a spoiler to tell you I did find a nest to watch, and Lisa and Paul Hendricks are right here in this front audience. They were a big part of finding and watching the nest. And I finally got a blind set up, a camouflage turkey hunting blind. And this is when the beginning, when I just had the blind watch, so I could hopefully not scare the birds and watch them in the nest. The blind watch began. Within 5 minutes of settling into the camp chair, I heard a rapid, soft chitter. Halcyon dropped anchor on the boulder with a plump, dark-colored trout, the size of an anchovy and compressed lengthwise in her bill. Within my hiding place, I could zero in on the upper blue band, the lower auburn belt, and the way her blue feathers shone on a day of clouds and sun. White speckles sprayed over blue wings, and the white barring on her flirty tail shimmied with each flick. Like a ballet dancer, she flew in a releve of grace and muscle. I counted 3 flaps to the hole, where she tucked inside for 2 minutes before the élance of a leap skyward. The world had changed from within the blind. On the one hand, it felt confining. On the other, I was like Harry Potter wearing his cloak of invisibility. Brits have a different term for blinds. They call them hides. I could see the advantage of both names. I wanted the birds to be blind to my presence as I hid like a child in a game of hide and seek. A robin cantilated into song worthy of a sea shanty just 5 feet away in an alder. A yellow warbler brushed against the tent fabric and landed within hand's reach. Showy as a dandelion, her voice was honey pouring from a jar. A black-capped chickadee jigged among branches. The world had come closer in 5 minutes. Bang! A dipper clanged into the front screen. I ducked as if someone had thrown a dirt clod. The groggy bird staggered to his feet and lurched into the air. The dipper's world had changed, too. A few minutes after the crash, CX touched down with a tumbling of clickety-clackety notes and a fish. There on the boulder, he turned his head toward me. I met his sharp, beady, forward-facing eyes right when I lifted my binoculars. Darn, with all 3 window flaps down, looking through the camo-tinted screens, I was too visible after all. Any movement would be noticed. Sure enough, CX huffed upstream. I heard jangled notes a few minutes later from downstream, but he returned to dash into the hole, evaporating into the darkness for the span of one breath. He backed out, sans fish, turned and parlayed away. So they were busy feeding fish to their young, to their chicks deep within the burrow, 4.5 feet deep in, and that's what we were watching. It was very exciting. And this is another part from the Nest Watch chapter, and I had been looking. Sometimes I would bring some research with me. If I had some lulls, and I would read. And I was reading this 1938 account of a naturalist who described how these little boys playing outside had disturbed these kingfishers, and it made me think about how kids just aren't running free and playing like they used to for hours on end with their parents not knowing where they were. And it made me think of this story. And I'm going to embarrass my son because he is now quite the adult in the purple shirt right here. When Ian was 7, he met the bright-eyed and daring Clara, who would become an outdoor friend, leading the way. Clara's mother and I cheered their continuing scrambles into thickets, building forts, climbing trees, and dunking in the creek. We welcomed their scratched, hungry, and grinning returns to the kitchen. Alone, Ian's tendency leaned toward reading. Not long after I moved to Missoula from Oregon in 1986, to attend graduate school in journalism, I stumbled upon the urban wilds of Greeno Park. I'd often bring my notebook to jot ideas for the weekly column I wrote for the Kaiman, University of Montana student newspaper. One day, as I scanned Rattlesnake Creek for a dipper, a boy about 10 came up to me and said, "Are you looking for that big bird up there?" He pointed to the perched osprey 20 feet above me. I had my theme of missing the obvious and learning to see anew through a child's eyes. A few months later, I joined a crusade to save the beavers that Mountain Water Company had proposed to trap in an ill-advised attempt to rid Rattlesnake Creek of Giardia, a waterborne parasite which entered Missoula's water supply in 1983. Until then, the creek served the city with pure drinking water. The company then tapped the valley's aquifer with the creek as a backup supply. Although beavers can spread Giardia, so do many other animals, including pets, livestock, and people. We called ourselves Castor, in capitals, C-A-S-T-O-R, Citizens Against Senseless Trapping of Rodents. Castor canadensis is the scientific name for beaver. I wrote a column chastising Mountain Water Company and lauding the beaver as a keystone species. Without the keystone, the ecology collapses. Someone cut out the column and posted a laminated copy on a prominent sign within Greeno Park. I was pleased. The head of Mountain Water Company was not. We did win the fight, and beavers continued to dam various arms of the creek, creating pools that serve as nurseries for young trout and prey of kingfishers, young trout, the prey of kingfishers. I've known and defended this creek over the years. At last, I was becoming an inhabitant. My idea of community was shifting. My home creek had become a sentient being, the holder of all stories, sustaining life and carrying memories toward a confluence. Of course, now, you know, the dam is gone, and the city owns the water supply, so things are really changing and renewing up at Rattlesnake Creek and higher up. Keeping an eye on time, because I wanted to make sure I give a lot of time to our next person, but I think we're doing fine. The next little part I wanted to share is just to give a sense of this. Middle of the book is called Winter Story, and in that I have written, collected and shared quite a few of indigenous myths of the kingfisher, and not going to share them here because I think really should be shared in the winter, but I'm going to start with a little bit about the Bugbee Preserve. For those of you who don't know it, it's just up past Greeno Park a little ways in a special little 3-acre spot. My fingers traced the faint lettering etched on the squared-off boulder set back from Rattlesnake Creek. As the powdery snow fell away, the words stood out. In attending to this wilderness, I knew myself to have been instructed for life. Henry Bugbee. The creek murmured below a shield of ice. The kingfishers had left. Ponderosas high above me twinkled with silvery rime on their long needles. I often wandered the sanctuary, a 5-minute walk downstream from my door. Often I paused by the quote that resonated even more after the first season of Kingfishers. Follow the bird, listen to the messenger. This was a season of reflection and storytelling. For years, Henry had hiked almost daily up Mount Jumbo's canted flanks on the east side of the Rattlesnake Valley. Later, he switched to Waterworks Hill on the west side, ascending the more forgiving yet challenging trail up the North Hills Ridge. Every walk was a meditation, and every step a grounded connection, while Henry examined the realms of the mind. I missed meeting him striding up the ridgeline with his trekking poles, his silvery white hair blowing in the wind. Never did I feel intimidated by his prodigious knowledge. He was an eloquent wilderness advocate and philosophy professor at the University of Montana, retiring in 1978. On a visit to see me, my brother David once disappeared for hours on what he thought would be a brief run on the North Hills. When he returned, breathless and animated, he recounted meeting a man of great brilliance on the crest of Waterworks Hill. There, where ravens converge on gusty days, they discussed Homer's Odyssey, and time slipped away. I go on in this chapter to talk a little more about Henry and the Preserve and the boulder and Sally Moore, and it does get to myths eventually. And the last part, I want to just, is in the very last chapter, so I'm jumping to the end. And after, when I got to 2015, that was the time Ian actually had graduated from high school, so he took off, and I decided to do my own roaming time and as a naturalist in my pop-up camper, but I was still really compiling the kingfisher, all my notes and journals, and continuing my pondering of this bird that is still my muse. Traveling far, I followed Salish elder Louis Adams' adage of not rushing when everywhere is home. Often alone with plenty of time within my solar-powered camper, I sifted through Rattlesnake Creek field journals to seek more patterns and meanings. I was pleasantly startled by the number of firsts and felt a kindred connection to all naturalists who deepen what we know and bridge the canyon of our separation from nature. Why does it matter that kingfishers hover in ram banks, carry pebbles in their beaks in courtship, and chase swallows away instead of staying put on their eggs for hours? Why care about the meaning of the rare gender reversal of color? What's the significance of females chasing females and all the variations of belt size and color I found in the Smithsonian? Why travel afar to sleuth the closest relatives, the ringed kingfishers of the lower Rio Grande and the giant kingfishers of South Africa? I believe our kinship with all life is at stake. Unless enough of us spend time in the field, immersing, noticing, reveling, and wondering, we won't act in time to save ourselves. We don't have to be biologists. We only have to be curious. When it comes to belted kingfishers, their trilling, consonant-rich calls above waterways send a message the Salish people have known since time immemorial. Water is life. Treat wild waters as you would an elder. Listen to their wisdom. Honor the complex web of riparian plants and forests, vital to shading, cooling, and nourishing thousands of species converging on these living ribbons of lush green. I'd come to know the kingfishers on one stretch of a home creek as family. Their well-being mattered in the way of love that is reciprocal, supportive, and essential. Thank you.
Let's do questions now, and then we'll.
All right, and I wanted to add too, I hope I haven't been too close to the mic the whole time. Has that been all right? Okay, phew. So I just wanted to say there were a couple things I'm not sure I said, that this actually is the first book ever to feature the belted kingfisher, considering it's so, it's our kingfisher that's all across North America when there's 120 species worldwide. So, and then I wanted to, for those who do take a look later at the book, there's beautiful illustrations, and I'm very grateful to the artist, Ron Popish. And then the last thing, I also appreciate authors who are so generous in writing blurbs for other people's books. It's very kind and supportive and meaningful. So I had quite a few of them, and one of them was Deborah Magpie Erling's on the back of my book. So she opened the conference today and the festival today. And so I feel honored to have the author of Perma Red writing on the back of my book. So, okay, any questions? Yes, Maureen.
Should the bird go up and down? Because that seems to be what I've noticed over the years.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Lisa and Paul now have been watching a lot more than I have over the past few years. And, there's never a high number of kingfishers to begin with because they spread out, and the fishing territories are often a mile or two apart. And then in the winter, the females will often go south. But in terms of like how that varies over the years in numbers, I mean, there's seeing some declines overall in kingfishers like there are in a lot of birds, unfortunately. But I don't know, I'm going to ask actually Paul if you have any thoughts on that, and Lisa. I got my great biologist right here.
I think one of the things is that the weather patterns have changed in the last few years. Spring has come later and later,
Yeah, so Lisa is bringing up weather changes, and climate change, as we know, is influencing many things, and timing, and certainly flooding. In some places, well, flood is a natural part of these ecosystems. You flood out these kingfisher nest stream banks, and that can really affect them. I don't know. Do you had any other thought on that, Paula?
I've got lots of thoughts, no answers. But one thing that strikes me is that kingfishers when you go where there's fish, and movements of fish, fish are static in the streams, and so they're affected by temperature, things like that. And I don't know, they move in and out of the rattlesnake in some places where they might be fishing, and that can affect them. But
Yeah.
you're right, basically, kingfishers space themselves out, so they never see them.
Yeah, but that's a good point Paul talks about. Kingfishers go where the fish are. And as we know too, we're seeing droughts and higher stream temperatures and more trouble for our fish. So, a kingfisher in a way can be a messenger for how we take care of our streams and rivers and waterways for all of us. So, and it's very important what's happening. Yeah, Tom.
That was a fascinating reading.
Oh, thanks.
I live in Coos Bay on the coast.
Oh, and by the way, in the very beginning, I have several paragraphs that take place in Coos Bay. Sorry.
Different varieties of kingfisher. I love to go down and watch them. They're so cool. Are the ones that I'm seeing out on the bay, the sloughs in the Coos Bay area, are they the same as the ones out here on the Rattlesnake?
Yeah, they are. I mean, that's exactly right. The belted kingfisher is basically our only species of kingfishers until you get to the Mexico border. And that's where you'll sometimes get the ring kingfisher, the green kingfisher, and occasionally the Amazon kingfisher. But worldwide, their kingfisher species are incredibly radiant and colorful and diverse and all over. And, but we have the belted, and the belted kingfisher is amazingly adapted to so many places. So seeing them over the ocean areas in Coos Bay and nesting along there is just an incredible joy. And I've seen them also doing crazy things like fishing in tide pools at Devil's Churn with huge waves coming in, so they're amazing birds. And one of the things I do write about is some of the science of just what makes them so good at fishing, their vision, their way of entering the water. It's pretty incredible, their flight.
Now, I don't want to embarrass you. However, I have never heard the call of a kingfisher.
Ah.
What's that?
Okay, well, here it goes. Kind of like that, right? It is. It's a rattle. Yeah. And I've always thought it is a little like a chatter of a squirrel, but it's more birdy. It's got a more musicality, and they do vary. That's what I tried to write about, is sometimes when they're just sort of conversing on themselves, they seem to like to talk to themselves. It's kind of a quiet thing. But if they're like flying by you and they're a little alarmed, it can be quite loud. Yeah. You're welcome. That wasn't the best rendition. We need other people who are better at kingfisher calls, but I try. So I guess, and one more question, then we'll make sure we have time for our next wonderful speaker. Okay. Oh, Ian.
Do you have any theories or ideas as to why kingfishers are so wary of people?
Oh, yeah. Kingfishers, why are they so wary of people, and are they ever? I mean, that's what I realized, like, wow, I picked a super hard bird. We all did to follow. They do not like disturbance. And sometimes, that they're a little more habituated, like down in the winter while they're hanging out by the ice or something, they're not as disturbed. But overall, and the reasons, no, I guess we can say that we don't know why they're quite like this. It just seems like whether it's a question of being like evolutionarily smart, and they're never going to get used to you, and it's to their benefit to be that way. But one of the things about kingfishers, even though I followed them and read as much as I could, is they still remain a bird that there are a lot of answers, a lot of questions that we have, and we do not have the answers, including why the female is more colorful than the male, even though I tried all through this book to find that answer. So, thank you.
All right, everyone, it is my privilege to introduce Bruce Smith, a career wildlife biologist with a PhD in zoology. He is an award-winning author of 5 books of science, natural history, and outdoor adventure. He also writes novels that capture the imaginations of young readers and immerse them in the natural world. The second book in his middle grade trilogy, Legend Keepers, was released last month. Please welcome Bruce Smith.
Well, I was sitting over here while Marina was talking, and I was watching all these people walking over to the other room. Christy and Bert Smith is over there.
I think that's the reason why everybody was walking that way. And I thought, boy, they are missing a great talk. Is this working okay? Can you hear me fine? Okay. And we kind of Marina and I got put in at the last minute here. I think it was yesterday afternoon or evening. They had an opening, someone canceled, and we both volunteered, and so here we are. And although this group is small, I'm really glad you're all here. So as Adam said, I'm going to be talking about my new book. It's a children's book. I'll be talking about it again Saturday morning. There's a children's series that's going to be held on the second floor downstairs. But I thought today would be an opportunity to talk to big kids about it as well. So that's what I hope to do. And obviously there's no kids here now. How many of you have kids or grandkids of your own? Okay, I didn't cover everybody there. How many of you who don't have kids sometimes feel like a kid or want to? Okay, I think I've covered everybody now. And that's the universality of this series, Legend Keepers, is it's written for kids, it's written for their families, and it's written for anybody who wants to just feel like a kid for a few hours while they're reading it. It's the second in a series. You can see them both up there. The first book came out a year ago, August of 21. You know, a lot of times authors, the first question they're asked at some kind of a presentation is, why did you write your latest book? And so here's my story. I am a career wildlife biologist, a scientist. I spent 30 years doing that. Went to school in Missoula. And after writing 5 nonfiction books, I decided that I wanted to write for children. And when I told a friend that, he said something like, kids' books, really? Not a full-throated endorsement I was trying to do. But I went ahead anyway, even though I hadn't really ever planned to do that. And I switched from writing nonfiction books about wildlife and wildland conservation. The reason is because when I was on tour for my book, Life on the Rocks, I was really disappointed that I think I did 14 events in 17 days, and I had almost 0 kids show up for my talk. Even though the publicity said, this is a talk for the whole family with lots of pictures of animals. Still, their parents and their grandparents didn't bring kids. And so it just hit me that I needed to write a story for kids. And I would talk directly to them or my characters in the book would. What I wanted to do was to have young people know about the seldom seen animals that live on mountaintops, what we call the alpine zone. They live out of sight, out of mind, and mountain goats and other animals suffer lots of challenges now, conservation challenges. And what I decided to do was to take the chapter in this book, Life on the Rocks, that covers climate change, global warming, and how it's affecting alpine species, and then fashion that into a book for kids. A similarity between Marina and I, she said her book is the first one ever written about kingfishers. This is only the second book ever written about mountain goats for an adult audience. You may know of Doug Chadwick. Doug and I went to school together. He wrote the first book in '83. This came out 2014. So I decided I was going to fashion a story for kids that focus on climate change. It's a topic that's really important to me. And beyond that, I just enjoy a good challenge. I'd never written fiction. I'd never written for kids, and I thought, why not? I'll give it a try. And so I dove into writing Legend Keepers, and I was probably not even a third of the way into the first book, The Chosen One, which is not up there. And I realized there was a lot more here than I realized. It was going to be a series. So 2 books so far, the third book will be coming out maybe in another year or so. And once you start writing, this is kind of the first thing that happens. Internally and externally, you start getting these questions like, how's your book coming? How far along are you? When do you think it'll be done? The story began to materialize with the main character. It's a newborn mountain goat. Her name's Buddy. My fondness for mountain goats began way back in the 1970s when I was doing my graduate work here at the University of Montana. I lived deep in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness area, about 50 miles south of here, among mountain goats for 2 years. Spring, winter, summer, fall, all those seasons. And I've never lost that fascination for them, have continued to climb where they are, photograph them. Life on the Rocks has 117 color photographs in it. Most of those are mine. They're just a very special people, a very special animal that people don't know much about. You know what I was going to say. The mountain goat serves actually as a perfect gateway species for the climate crisis, an animal to convey what's happening from an animal's viewpoint. And that's because that animal, the mountain goat, lives at the highest altitudes of any large animal in North America. And it's at the highest altitudes and also at the highest latitudes, the polar regions, where the climate is warming fastest, 2 to 3 times faster, say, at the top of the Bitterroots than it is on a global average. So species that live there are experiencing warming much more rapidly than we are down here, and they're going to have to adapt more quickly if they can. The first book in the series, The Chosen One, I had only animal characters in it, and Buddy was the star of that, is the star of that. She is chosen after she becomes orphaned. Her mother disappears during the night. She is chosen by Rourke, a wizardly raven, who becomes her mentor and close friend as the only one who can save her mom's band of goats from a great peril foretold in an ancient legend. And that great peril in the ancient legend is the great warming. And although Buddy knows that things are changing on her mountain, she doesn't know why. And when you read the book, you'll realize that all of the information about animals, ravens, mountain goats, pygmy owls, hoary marmots, golden eagles, all of it is factual. The story is simply fictional. So mountain goats can't know the cause of global warming. They can't know that it's going to get worse. They don't know what the outcome for this is. So in the second book, I introduced human characters so that I could delve more deeply into the climate crisis, and that way I could explore through these characters what was happening, and hopefully in a way that kids who read the book or adults will be able to relate to those characters and see what's happening through a kid's eyes or through a marmot or a mountain goat's eyes. In the partnership, 12-year-old Garson and his mom have moved to a new community. He hasn't made friends. He doesn't fit in at school. He's just a really different kid. He's very introverted. And worst off yet is his father's gone missing during combat operations in Afghanistan. It's a kid really struggling. Every day is a struggle for him. Until the Spring Science and Art Fair, when he has an interest in glaciers that's piqued by a display that's there. So for his 6th grade project, he climbs to Shining Mountain. The legend is the legend of Shining Mountain. And he climbs to the glacier, and it's in the wilderness not too far from his home. It could be a place like Glacier Park. It could be a place like Mount Rainier or any number of other places in the northwestern United States that have glaciers. I don't cite it specifically. And he happens to bump into this small mountain goat, this amazing, remarkable mountain goat. And one of Buddy's talents is she can speak with other animals. And they both find that they can communicate, Garson and Buddy. And it develops a relationship. And as a result of that, this introverted boy becomes an environmental advocate. And that's how the second book goes. It's how that develops over time. So sometimes it just takes a partnership to bring out the best in us. I don't think I'll read anything. I'll just tell you a little bit here about what happens partway through the book after Garson develops his interest in glaciers. He starts doing lots of research. It's during the summer now because it was a spring art and science fair when his interest was peaked. That was in May. So over summer, he becomes really interested. He reads books at the library. He's online, Googling everything he can about glaciers, and he's just totally enthralled by this. So to Garson, it's almost like after he develops this appreciation and love for glaciers, it's like they're alive. And because that's how he thinks of them, their melting and inevitable disappearance are all the more troubling. So just for example, we know that glaciers are melting, just as we know the polar ice caps are melting, Greenland's melting. And as an example of that, and pictures do speak more than 10,000 words, here's Jackson Glacier in Glacier National Park, 1911 and 2008. And all of the remaining 25 glaciers in Glacier Park are undergoing the same substantial change. In fact, Dan Fager, who's the recently retired glaciologist for the park, was there for almost 30 years studying the glaciers, told me that he expects within the next 10 years, none of these will be glaciers anymore. They'll just be non-moving ice fields or permanent snow fields. It's happening rapidly. And Garson understands this. But he also comes to realize that not just the glaciers in trouble, but mountain goats and other animals and plants that live near the glaciers are in trouble. They're all interdependent. The animals and the plants depend upon the meltwater from the glaciers, the cool air, all sorts of things as part of their own habitat. An article in the September 21st issue of Science last year forecasts that today's 6-year-olds are likely to live through 3 times as many climate disasters as their grandparents will. 3 times as many major hurricanes and typhoons, floods, droughts, fires, and so forth. Kids hear and see and read about this. They know what's going on. They're smart. They get it. And what's more troubling, I think, is the anxiety that they feel, which psychologists are now calling eco-anxiety or climate grief. It's compounded because kids see that those in charge, the adults, are not really doing much, or they're not doing it fast enough. So I think as a result of that, my experience is that some kids are running short on hope because they have all these years ahead of them and they're experiencing some fear of what the future holds. So what I wanted to do as a result of that and knowing all the research that's been going on like that, I wanted to write a hopeful book, a book of empowerment for kids, but one that wasn't preachy. So I chose fiction. And I wrapped the climate theme in a grand adventure at the roof of the world in which young readers experience the ongoing climate crisis through the thoughts, the eyes, the senses, and the dialogue of animals and kids their own age. And that way I could help maybe give them hope, fuel their aspirations, and also their activism, because kids are truly leading when it comes to dealing with the climate crisis. Legend Keepers, these 2 books and the one to come, and maybe another one after that, are a blend of fiction and nonfiction. They're intended to entertain kids, but also to educate and engage them in this issue. And there are other issues that are rolled into this, including some of the many issues that kids deal with in their own personal social lives. The book covers issues of hope, dealing with loss. Buddy lost her mother. There's Garson's father's missing. Issues of bullying. Both Buddy and Garson experienced bullying. Buddy from other mountain goats in the dominance hierarchy. Garson in school. There's a whole series of things where they have sort of parallel lives, and then it comes together when they meet at the glacier. And at the back of each book, there's several pages that have factual information for kids, what kids like to call fun facts about glaciers, about climate change, about alpine animals, about geology. And so these are perfect books for in the classroom for STEM learning, for engaging families in discussions, because everyone can read them, or younger kids can read them with their parents. But you'll find they also will make you laugh. And that's what I have. So if you have any questions. Questions or comments, I'd be glad to hear them and try and respond.
You mentioned you went to school with another person who wrote a book about mountain goats.
Yeah.
Was that something you guys bonded over in your education experience? How did you both have that passion and wind up in the same room together?
When it comes to mountain goat biologists, we could put them all in this room and we would only use maybe a couple of extra chairs. That's how many there are in North America. Even though mountain goats live in 4 Canadian provinces and 10 states, they are truly the least known, least studied, and least written about large mammal on the continent, less so than muskox, believe it or not. So it was ironic that when I got to Missoula, actually I got to Missoula at the start of my junior year. I was born and raised in Michigan. And went to school there for a couple of years, left college, enlisted in the Marines, and when I got back from Vietnam, I headed to Missoula. I already decided this is where I wanted to go to school. Came out here, finished my bachelor's. Doug Chadwick, the person I talked about, was a year ahead of me. He had started his master's program when I was doing my senior year of undergraduate work. And I hadn't met Doug. And I went directly with a gap of 9 days from doing my bachelor's work into a master's program because 2 different teaching assistants had failed to show up, one in the botany department and one in the biology department. I had applied to go to school that fall. This was in March when we were on quarters between the winter and spring quarter. I got a call. I was living in my car. You know, students' life can be tough. I got a call and asked, hey, did I want to teach? And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, can you start on Monday? Well, I had never taught before. The whole idea was intimidating to me of that. But I was going to not only be starting to teach on Monday, I was going to be teaching 2 classes, general ecology, and the other one was introductory botany. And of course, I wasn't teaching the lectures, I was doing the labs, but that was quite enough. Anyway, I started my graduate work and decided I wanted to study mountain goats. I had gotten really interested in them during my undergraduate work, spent a lot of time in the winter up these Bitterroot canyons, going in 5-6 miles, coming back out, starting to be able to see goats, census them, and just get totally swept away by the way they live their lives. And then I met Doug. And Doug was doing his work in the Swan Range. He lived in a wall tent at about 6,000 feet on a wind-blown ridge through the winter and spring. I lived the first winter in a pup tent down in the Bitterroot and decided I needed to get better housing if I was going to be able to do much research, because a lot of it was just survival and maintenance trying to live like that. So we brought in a little, it was a hard-sided camper, but it was only this high. It was like cab high on a pickup when you would slide it in. And we brought it up 5 miles on an old road to a reservoir. And that road was excluded from the Salway Bitterroot Wilderness when it was established in 1964, because it was a road. It was really not a road, it was a track. And we dropped that camper off, and then I spent the next 2 winters living in that with a big fluffy dog part of the time, and a lot of shrews that I never could figure out how they were getting in. So Doug and I met each other. He came down to the Bitterroot, spent time with me. I went up and spent time with him. He taught me what he knew, and to this day we keep in touch. Doug has written like 15 books about everything from whales to elephants and all around the world, but he, like me, still has this special spot in his place for mountain goats. So I wanted to bring that through my books, of course, to kids, because they don't get to see these animals. And I did a study with a research biologist from Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. We wrapped that up in 2018. 2-year study. We did a comprehensive survey of all the mountain goat populations in the state. The first time it had been done since the mid-1940s, so a 70-year gap. And we found during that time the native goat populations in the state, not the few that have been introduced east of the Continental Divide, the native goat populations in the state have declined by 70%, and most people have no idea. If that had happened with elk or bighorn sheep or you name your species, people would really be up in arms. But most people don't even know that's happening with mountain goats. And we really don't know why, but I'm quite sure that climate change has a lot to do with it, because these are really cold adapted species. That's a long answer to your question. They do. So I did my research down in the Salway Bitterroot 73, 74, 75. In the 1960s was really the heyday of goat hunting. Have you hunted goats, or do you know? Okay. Or just have an interest in them, sort of. Okay. That was the heyday, the 60s of goat hunting in Montana. The statewide number of permits during the 60s varied between 700 and 1,100 per year. If you wanted to hunt goats back then, it was pretty darn easy to draw one. Of course, there were a lot fewer people in Montana then, too. Today, and that was basically all native goats. Since then, there have been these transplants in places like the Crazies and the Madison Range and, different places like that. Today, in the native populations in the state, this year and last year, there are 11 permits. The state has realized in the last 20 years that these animals are really in trouble. And so there's like one permit in the hunting area where I was, and that's Region 2, and that's the only permit in Region 2. There's no hunting of goats in the Anaconda and Pintlers anymore, or the Sapphires, and I can go on and on. All the places where you can't hunt goats anymore because the population simply can't sustain it. So it's a big deal, and I really want kids as well as adults to know more about it. And to me, writing fiction, having characters that are engaging and sort of charming characters is a way to kind of pull kids in. Yeah. There are. There's no hunting there, but there are goats. A handful. Yeah. Yeah, if you go up there and see one, it's kind of a big deal. Like a lot of places. Have you been up there more recently to try and see them? Yeah. Yeah. It takes some work, too. Yes.
I think about the white coloration of non-goats, and there's been all the studies of animals that can change color, like snowshoe hares, ptarmigans, and how that climate change can really put them in trouble. But mountain goats that stay white all the time with less snow, is that exposing them to more predation, or what's the connection you think between their white coat and not as much snow standing out?
It's kind of a twist on why our female kingfisher is more colorful, right? It's hard to say because polar bears are white. They live in cold climates. Doll sheep are white. They live in cold climates. We know a lot of animals that turn white in winter, but they're brown in summer. Snowshoe hares, weasels, so forth. Why the mountain goat is white is really hard to say. My belief, thinking of it as a scientist and thinking of the physiology of the animal, it's because they are so well insulated that the white will reflect the summer sun. As it is, they don't shed their coats completely until July. So by the time they shed, they could easily be overheating. And what they do at that time of the year, July, August, right now, in the warm part of the day, even up where they are, highest places in Glacier or pick your mountain range, they're seeking out shade, and especially they're seeking out glaciers and snowfields because it'll be 15 degrees colder there. So even as they're shedding and going to, a very short coat, can't get this to go back for some reason. So when they have the shorter coat, and this is a kid goat, about 3 to 4 months old, about this time of year, they are still extremely well insulated. And of course, the adults had a lot more hair than that they shed over a 3-month period. So I think that's why they're white. They certainly are a lot harder to see in the wintertime. Somebody else.
Better climbers than doll sheep.
Than doll sheep? Well, I'll answer a couple things here, and then we'll both come up here and talk a little bit. I'm biased, but these guys are the ace of alpinists. They are the consummate climbers, maybe the best mountaineer that's ever lived. There's a couple of species in Asia that'll give them a run for their money, but certainly in North America. The way I like to put it with sheep, sheep are free climbing scramblers, goats are technicians. They'll find ways that sheep could never find up a cliff. I've watched them do just some amazing things, including what I first observed down in the Bitterroots and no one else at that time had ever reported. I call it walkovers, where a goat will walk out on a ledge that gets thinner and thinner and thinner, sheer drop off below, sheer wall above, and they are out there at the very edge where it just disappears into thin air. There's no place to go, and there's not room to turn around. So what do? They do what I call a walkover. They bring their feet up, their front feet up above their head, and then walk them across the cliff, and they're going the opposite way. And I don't know of anybody that's ever seen a sheep do that, so that's pretty remarkable.
I've actually studied bighorn sheep for a couple of seasons, and I've never seen that, so that's an interesting fact. But my question was, did you like the interspecies interactions in the book? Did you draw anything from like field observations? Like, have you ever seen ravens and the goats interact or anything like that, or is it all kind of just like stuff you imagined in your head?
Interactions with different species. Oh, as I'm portraying in the book. Yeah, good question. Yeah, I gave a talk last night in Bozeman at the Country Bookshelf, and I got a question really similar to that. And the question was, what's it like writing about these animals you studied, but doing it in a fictional way, in a make-believe story? And I said, well, what I tried to do in these books was to make sure I got all of the details of behavior and biology and their habitat right. That's important to me. But what fiction allows us to do is expand the reader's experience and then talk about what we imagine or what we would like to know. And so that's where I took it at that point. So the characters then, I took the liberty, as we authors get to do in fiction, of trying to think what they would think, talk how they would talk, and interact with other species as they would. Do mountain goats communicate with other animals like Buddy does with Rourke the raven or with Maurice the marmot? I don't know. I've certainly seen them interact, in close proximity, but mountain goats aren't very vocal for one thing. And secondly, they may communicate on a totally different level than what we do, and almost certainly. Even within their own groups, mountain goats use a lot of nonverbal communication, postures and threats and so forth. And that's how they maintain one another's position in the dominance hierarchy. So do they do that with other animals? I don't know, but it sure is fun to write about. Should we pull up a couple chairs maybe and just sit up here and see if anybody else has questions? We can trade off of this.
Okay, we can share. It's actually really, I don't want to keep people though, but I love, this is so great. This really was so impromptu that we didn't even know we were going to be able to do this today. And it is interesting to see some overlaps, in terms of the species. And I had no idea that mountain goats were so little studied. Because you see them up in Glacier and by Logan Pass, and people have this assumption about them that we must know a lot more about them than we do. But it sounds like you know a lot about them. Anyway, sure. Are there any other questions for both of us?
Illustrations of both of your books, fantastic.
Well, I have to comment on that because the illustrations, in my books, both of them, the cover art and the interior illustrations were done by my wife, Diana. So it was really a joint effort, and it just made it a lot more fun because my office is at one end of the house, she, the artist, is in the other end, and so it was so much easier to do that than to try and work with the artist I was assigned by my publisher, who was in Maryland. And she didn't know what a mountain goat was, and that was a real struggle. And early on, I said, you know, I think there's a better way to do this.
On kind of pursuing kinship with the kingfisher as a way of understanding our environment. I'm curious, Bruce, you seem to have factored that into the plot of Legend Keeper with the human character. Would you both say that is, in your opinion, crucial for us to have a better understanding of the changing climate, our impact on it, and inspiring future generations to do something?
Oh, I'll start first since
you
I
go
have the
first,
mic.
yeah.
We both are. I love that question. Thank you. I think kinship is exactly what we need to have with other animal species. And thinking about it, the session right before us was about grizzly bear, the grizzly in the driveway. And there was just so much, it really brought up for me the disconnect, of people who really think that it's about them, like we're the ones, it's our right to go out and recreate and have these experiences and have our beautiful places to live on the water or whatever it is. And, I think the more we can get people to pause and think of our relationship as much more reciprocal and essential, then we will start treating other sentient beings with a lot more respect and with also I think something that your book brings up, and I'll let you address it, is for children and things too, that I think there's kind of a loneliness that comes from separation from other animals, and we, people being very connected to technology. And so I think I love that your children's book is building that relationship and that you accidentally said people at one point instead of animals. I was like, yeah, well, really it is like and certainly some of the traditional knowledge that's in my book, I tried to get from the Salish people, this elder particularly, talked about animals as people, as all of us as people. And you start thinking of us that way, then hopefully it's not all about us all the time.
Oh, Maureen, this is just so great. I can't believe we've never met before, but the overlap here. I worked during my professional career with Native Americans for 4 years. The Wind River Indian Reservation in Wyoming, Northern Arapaho, and Eastern Shoshone tribes. I'd been in their homes, their teepees, been to the powwows, because I was working with them to restore wildlife on the reservation. I was the technical expert there. They did all the decision-making that was really difficult, very controversial, largely because those two tribes were traditional warring enemies, and in their infinite wisdom, the federal government put the Arapaho on the Shoshone's homelands. So I have a lot of background in how Native people think. I can't think like them, but I have some background in it. While I was writing the second book, The Partnership, I read the book Braiding Sweetgrass. Anybody read Braiding Sweetgrass? What a book. And I just had this connection with the author, Robin, because she is Native American, but the way she wrote was the way I think. And it's what you were talking about, kinship with life, kinship with non-living things on the earth. And the way Native people see the world around them is, first of all, you don't own anything except maybe your bow and arrow and your cooking pots and that sort of thing. But you own nothing of the land because it belongs to everyone or no one. And secondly, they think about life not in a hierarchical way, the way we do, where man tends to put themselves at the top, non-Aboriginal humans, that is, and everything else falls down below. We categorize, what's more important than others. Bugs are not as important as mountain goats or kingfishers. Native people don't look at it that way. Everything's on a horizontal plane. Rocks, trees, ground squirrels themselves. Everything's the same. Everything has a spirit. They're all kin. They're all cousins. And I think that is something we have lost because of how far modern Western society has moved from the land. And the tragic part of that also is that there are so few truly Aboriginal people left that can sort of show us the way to get back to where we need to go.
I just wanted to add one thing when you mentioned braiding sweetgrass. One thing in my book I did decide to do was to not use the word it when I didn't know the gender of something, because that's something that Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about, is that that's a way of being impersonal with other beings. And she actually suggests a new pronoun that we use, ki and kin. Ki and kin is the plural. And that really hasn't taken off yet, so I didn't feel like I could do that in my book, but I wrote around it. And that was actually one, naming the birds was kind of a decision too, to be more personal, but not anthropomorphic. So I agree, and I also think that I will just add to the traditional ecological knowledge now is becoming such a big field, and there was, I think, more and more Indigenous peoples are speaking up and telling their story and relearning their languages, and we need to listen and let them speak and white people have been probably speaking too long for them. So I really respect those voices that are coming out more and more. Okay, going on and on.
I want to add one more thing that you prompted. As I said in the first book, The Chosen One, it's all animal characters. There's one bad guy that makes a short appearance, but inconsequential. In the second book, Buddy and Rourke and some others return from the first book, but most of the chapters are dedicated to Garson and his story. It's a parallel story with Buddy's. Of those human characters, 2 of them are Native American. And I was determined if I was going to write a book for kids, it was going to have Native people in it. So I won't tell you who the characters are. I'm not going to spoil that, but you'll find out and then think about this conversation you had with Marina and I when you read it.
Are we good? Okay. Thanks to everyone.